especially the following we have now on these videos, I really, really, it's a real sense of responsibility, and that I get to have time with some of the biggest stars of the sport, and also that's going to go out, and that's going to be what people remember them by. Apart from their performances, now some of these interviews that I'm doing are quite preeminent. It's the kind of biggest long form interview that person has given in their career.
Matt Stevens, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Joe. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm intrigued to see how this goes. But when you approached me, I knew the name, but I obviously did a little bit of digging, and then saw how diverse your guests had been, which was the thing that actually thought, okay, this sounds really interesting, because there's a lot of really good podcasts out there, and there's a lot of quite average ones as well. So, but when I saw yours, I thought, this looks, some of the very, very interesting people that you've chatted to, means that I would imagine this is going to be slightly different than a regular cycling podcast. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but yeah. So looking forward to it.
Intrigued and diverse. I think that's a very nice way of saying that it's a bit odd. Because you wear so many hats, how on earth do you introduce yourself when you meet someone with whom you don't know? Because it's not a cake cutter job that you have.
No, quite often people ask what I do, and I do start with a bit of a and sort of unroll my eyes and think. I mean, generally now it's obviously cycling media, isn't it? But and increasingly more with Eurosport. So I kind of say, see, I'm struggling now. So cycling presenter, commentator, media creator for different brands, really. I think, but it's a rather long, unwieldy title, isn't it? But because I've just fallen into it, there's no real job role, but I think media creator, really, I guess, presenter. So you can see I haven't really still got my own label yet.
That's a very long label on a LinkedIn job description.
Yes, it is. That's why I'm not on LinkedIn, because people will be like, what the hell is this?
But on the flip side, though, you are a part of so many people's lives. People have spent hours in your company, first at GCN and then with commentary. They feel as though they know you because they spent hours with you, but you don't know them. Is that odd dynamic something that you ever reflect on?
It's a really good question. I don't really reflect on it. It's something that I encounter quite a lot, especially when I'm on the road or at an event where people come up to me and say hi. I haven't had anybody come up to me yet, touch wood, who has said, Matt, you're a bit of a twat, which is quite nice. But most people do come up to me as if they know me, which can be quite odd. But the way that I do what I do, I can kind of understand it, because when we started GCN all those years ago now, is a long time, because I left in 2018. And then we started, I first started there in 2013. It's a long, long time ago. And we, all of us, Dan, Simon and Tom, we'd all just been bike riders. So we hadn't had any formal media training. So we were given this clean slate, and nobody else, as you know, at that particular point, there was no cycling YouTube channels. There might have been one or two people, but this was very, very early. So we had no template. So we just thought, well, in our own style, which was the style of a couple of mates talking about stuff. So our presenting style, or my presenting style, and our own characters because we weren't really given any sense of direction, that the beauty of the origin of GCN was just be yourselves. Or actually, that wasn't, we weren't even told to be ourselves. So literally, there's no direction. So you're just talking about stuff that you care about. I'm loath to use the word passionate about, because it's a bit overused, but we really cared about being given the opportunity. So that style, and we were quite wooden at first, and then we were relaxed. Looking back at some of my early GCN, my early GCN stuff is interesting, to say the very least. But ultimately, it was just us mucking about on bikes and trying to explain and deconstruct a little bit about what bike riding was all about, training and the rest of it. And we soon found our own rhythm, which we tried to improve on to make it more succinct, tight, because there's informal, then there's informal, isn't there? Because you don't want it to be so loose that there's no real structure to it or point. But that bled through into my commentary style, although there is a slight amplification of that. When you present on stage, or whether you're at an event or whether you're on telly, you do have to impose a little bit more, credibility or gravitas or whatever. But essentially, my style is, I'm talking to you now like I would talk to you down the pub, but it does still take me off guard a little bit, because some people might hang back and say, "Can I speak to you?" Other people just come straight in and say, "Hey, how you doing, Matt?" And I'm like, And in my mind, I'm like, "Do I know you?" But some people actually say, "I'm sorry," and then they kind of reset and say, "I feel as if I know you." So, and I take that as a compliment, really, because that's what I hope people get out of it, is the fact that the stuff that I do is as accessible as it can be, because it's hopefully really natural. None of us are ever the finished article. Whatever we do, if you want to succeed, you just got to keep trying and making sure you don't rest on your laurels, never take anything for granted. But to have that quite regularly is it's like, okay, that's really nice. It kind of sets me, and it's actually pleasant. And I do thank people when people come up to me and say, "I like what you do," or whatever it is, like this pod, or like what you do at Sigma or whatever. And then generally a lot of people apologize for saying, "I didn't mean to take up your time. Thank you very much." So I'm like, hey, it's fine, because you've just taken the time to come up to me and you've said something nice, which in the world we live in, through all the optics that we look at stuff these days, it's very refreshing. The internet is, I think, a wonderful place, but it's also quite a dark place, problematic place. And it's the way we consume everything now, isn't it? So when somebody in real life comes up and takes the time to be pleasant, it's really good. And it's very motivating, actually. And it's a lovely thing. So it's still a bit odd, because I think, oh, and it's like, oh yeah, that's the way I feel. Is the very long answer to your question, Joe? Yeah.
If we just take the commentary, for example, your deployment of adjectives is extraordinary. My favorite is when you say that's a scintillating attack. Are these words that are in your daily lexicon, or do you curate and select certain words ready to be deployed live on air?
That's another really, really good question. They're all general words that I will use. Occasionally, you might hear a word that's like, nobody says that word, but then they're words you can't repeat, or you might save them. I mean, I know a few of my fellow commentators, if you're commentating on a very big race, for example, I mean, all races are important, but the classics or a stage of the Tour or the Olympics or the Worlds, and there's a clear-cut move that goes clear and it's one rider that's going to win. It's at that point you can actually start jotting down one or two little notes, so you can really make that final 100 meters as they cross the line like sing. Often you can never do that because it's a sprint of 5 or it's a bunch sprint, and it's just chaos. And so there's less adjectives, more energy in terms of your delivery, because you just haven't got time to list all the team names, the colors, the direction, who's overtaking who. But when there's a single rider clear, you do have time to craft something of a little bit of heft, and so you might jot down a couple of words that you might not have mentioned that day. You certainly wouldn't want to use a particularly obtuse adjective if you've used it already that day. It seems a little bit, gratuitous. So there's once or twice in big races where I've jotted not the whole sentence, but these are the words I want to use because this needs to be special. And that rider's going to remember that, and that's going to get played on social. So it needs to be hopefully good. So there's a few times when you might do that, but generally speaking, I'm just interested in. My wife Holly is a writer. We've got a house full of books. She's in far better read than I am, but I do take an interest in film and in books. So and language. and my job is to communicate. So I don't go out and look for new words. It's just, I'm 54 now and I've been around a long time, so they just kind of seep. If you're consuming a lot of culture and reading a lot of stuff, generally you're going to have a lot more language to draw from and use it when you need to within cycling. Because I think what you don't want to do is try and speak as if you're belittling anybody, you know, and so this is my command of English, and I'm going to bamboozle you by my stunning lexicon. It's not what that's about. It's about conveying as best you can using accessible words. To the more language you can deploy, the more layered a feeling you can get across. But I will, yeah, I'll draw on what I've got. And sometimes words will come in that are kind of a little bit I've not used before. It's like, wow, and that actually fitted. And I sometimes get a little compliment. I can't believe you just put that word in, but it's kind of nice because those words are there for a reason, to explain and to amplify certain situations and certain dynamics. Rather than that, oh no, that's a really great attack. I mean, that's fine, but you start saying that's another great attack. I mean, we all have our own ticks. And there'll be sentences that I use, that Rob uses, that Carlton uses, that Sean uses, that when you're doing 5 hours, there's going to be a repetition. So because of that, I do try and introduce different structure, and not so much consciously. It's just something I've always tried to do. Yeah.
That's quite interesting, because if we look at one of the great orators of our time, Winston Churchill, he always preferred Anglo-Saxon words over Latin words. So he would say sweat instead of perspiration, for example. And that's just to relate to the audience more, to just make it easier that the message which he's saying can be received and digested in an easier fashion. But then it's quite funny if you read some of the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He preferences Anglo-Saxon words, but then about every 15th word, he'll put in a really big, not necessary Latin word or something like that, just so you know as the reader, he's got the big lexicon.
Yeah.
And it's just funny. Everyone has their different styles and what they aim to do.
Yeah. Maybe a subtle influence that, now you come to mention that, was my grandfather, who sadly passed away years ago, 1993. So I was only a young man, but I did spend quite a bit of time with him. And I think in terms of language, he worked in finance, but he spent a lot of time in Germany during the war, just after the war actually, spoke German. But he would learn three German words, new German words every day, and at least 2 new English words every day. So he used to walk around the house with a thesaurus. And when I was there, because he used to get up really early, make us a cup of tea in the morning, the family were there as well. And he was the kind of old school chap that used to whistle as well. So it was radio 4 would be on in the background at a kind of low level, just like this kind of noise. And then he'd be whistling, and he'd have this thesaurus in his back, his well-thumbed thesaurus in his back pocket. And I think that influenced me a little bit subconsciously, because I thought, how cool is that? You know, he's making an effort, and he would have been in his late 70s then, to still learn a new couple of words every single day. So that was definitely an influence. But I think language is just a wonderful thing. But it's not like I'm not doing a conscious effort to impress anybody. I just think I actually enjoy it. It's basically, I enjoy learning. And as I've got older, I enjoy learning even more. I didn't really enjoy it at school as much. I had a great time at school, but I was just sports. Now it's like, oh shit, I wish I'd learned a bit more or studied a bit more. So I find learning just brilliant. And so if I can incorporate any of that into, like, cultural references, subtle ones, again, not necessarily trying to impress people, but just to try and broaden the scope of being on air for 4 or 5 hours. When I work with Ned, I like working with Ned on the Giro for the world feed, because he's a historian basically. Is exceptionally well read. Of course, he's a writer, and when the racing settles into 3 riders up the road, bunch behind at 3 minutes, not much going on, that's when you can really draw on that. And then language becomes even more important to hold people, even if it's just old stories of what we've done in the past, or references to places that you're passing through. So language is massively important. And the deeper you go without alienating anybody, you can do it in a style that's quite gentle, and just drop things in and just add colour to the whole thing.
So that deliberate approach of bringing culture and colour into your commentary is really nicely juxtaposed against the raw emotion that you bring to it at the time. So when you were talking there, I think it was 2019 Amstel Gold came to mind when Van der Poel won. He came back from nowhere and then won. And your commentator was Rob Hatch. And Rob's bringing Van der Poel home as he's done this long sprint. And if you listen really carefully in the background, you can just hear you just gasping and laughing at this whole thing that's going on. Moments like that must be special.
Yeah, that's a particularly... I mean, I didn't hold anything back there, and I did think, oh, was that a little bit unprofessional? I don't even think, Joe, you have to listen too hard. I'm quite high in the mix. But that commentary gets played still quite often. And I was on site with Rob, so we were working for the World Feed. It wasn't Eurosport, but that's the one that generally gets played. I think it was Declan who was doing the Eurosport one. I think he did a very good job as well. But it was just, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, it's one of the best finishes to a race ever. And to be there to witness it, and we'd just seen that morning Cassia win her race in Amstel. So we were absolutely buzzing. And we were both stood up as well. So normally I sit down. Rob tends to stand up in a final. I still sit down, but on this occasion it was so thrilling that I stood up. I had my cans on, and I was just, my professionalism just kind of dropped away, and I was just a fan. But a lot of the time, you do have to hold a program together. But moments like that, I don't think there's any harm in giving away the fact that you really do care. You're emotionally completely and utterly invested and connected to what, and I think that's why that particular bit of commentary is so popular. Well, firstly because of what you're seeing on the screen, but a good commentary does elevate what you're seeing and gives it that added sense of drama. It's like the soundtrack to a film, a lovely bit of cinematography. You add the score to it, it kind of lifts it up a notch, doesn't it? It's I know they're very, very different things, but they are similar. But no, I actually got quite. There's a few times where I think I was clapping as well, so you could hear me clapping in the background. So, but and I said afterwards, I said to Rob, I said, "Was that unprofessional?" He said, "No, mate, it was." And we agreed that every now and again you're just floored by something, and that was pretty special because you can't do that all the time. But that particular occasion, and if things like that happen in the future, I'm not going to hold back on my emotion. And Rob doesn't, Carlton doesn't. They're both very different commentators. We all have our own style, but ultimately, I think showing that you care, and as long as you don't keep bursting into tears, is actually quite important. Because I've actually got the privilege of watching this bike race and conveying the essence of what it is, and the complexity of it to you, and also telling the story. And so you're a storyteller. So there's a massive responsibility. And to be too detached from that and too formal, it just falls flat. So, and it has to be balanced, but the responsibility is to basically be as good a storyteller as you can, and actually being emotionally invested. I don't think is a bad thing. I think it can heighten the experience for the viewer personally.
Responsibility you talk about spans across a lot of the facets of the job that you do, because when you're interviewing riders, especially after the stage or before the stage, it's your job to tease out as much as possible. Your style is quite big energy and quite chirpy, and I find that certainly from a viewer's point of view, because you're quite big energy, the riders are often quite reserved or shy or introverted. They become at ease and they can open up more. Is that you just being you, or is that a deliberate style in which you're deploying?
I think that's a different proposition. I'd really love talking to people, and I think because firstly I care and I'm interested in what they've got to say. I also have seen people in my position as journalists at races do a very bad job, and I make no bones about it. Awful. Especially a while ago, and I was new to it, and I thought, are you really speaking to that person like that? Or not in a like being rude, or sometimes people can be rude. So there's so many different aspects to it. So there's understanding when to talk and when to listen. From a bike rider's perspective, understanding timing in terms of when to ask the first question, when they're slumped over their bike, gasping for breath, and you've got a swan you and a press officer there trying to, and just sticking a microphone underneath isn't going to win you any friends. Least from the rider, press officer is going to. So it's about, firstly, it's about relationships, kind of trust, and then pitching your question in a tone that's going to, in a way that's going to elicit an answer, given all the different impact factors in the environment at that particular point. And I learned that from being a police officer for 12, 13 years. I've not really changed, but the situations that I've been involved in have kind of, the impact factors of the careers that I've had, the jobs that I've had, have gently shaped what I do. And I think I've got a reasonable, I'm quite receptive to the way, to NVCs, basically, the way people are, their mood. And that's still something that I find absolutely fascinating. But in the police, interviewing from the most vulnerable people in society to the most evil, and everything in between, gathering important evidence, gaining trust, with high stakes, and going to a bike race or going to do interviews on the cafe ride where there's low stakes, still I can bring that kind of toolbox, for want of a better word, and use it. So I just think, firstly, I think that listening is something that's massively overlooked. Finding and just waiting and pausing, listening, eye contact, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's something that I really think about. It's still me, but it's different versions of me dependent on the situation and the mood of the subject. It's massively important. And they're all things that you have to process very, very quickly when you're in a dynamic, dangerous, risky situation in the police, where communication is absolutely crucial. So it's kind of crucial, but the stakes are a lot lower in a bike race. But you might, if you do it wrong, you're not going to get a good interview, or a press officer is going to think, well, do I really want to let Matt have the first interview this time? So, but fundamentally as well, we all like to be listened to as well. So flip it around. If somebody's going to speak to you, the best interviews are when somebody actually listens and kind of cares. And that extends to doing live interviews on stage. I generally won't. I do have a plan, and I do quite a lot of prep, but I don't take it with me. I just turn it into a conversation, which is my kind of style. So be prepared. You might have 3 or 4 questions in your head doing a short interview, but it's being prepared for an answer that means that you need to follow it up, and that you can't just. It really winds me up when somebody gives a good answer, and then the interviewer goes to the default setting of the next question that they had in their notebook. It's so, well, I wouldn't say it's lazy. It's kind of unrefined, and it's kind of, okay, you've got, that being patronized, you've got a bit to learn, because the best conversation are when you actually listen to what they're saying and think, oh, and then go with that. It might be that the next question you have is perfectly fine because they finished it off. So the art of conversation is something that absolutely fascinates me. And some of the conversations I've had in my career have been ones where there's a lot at stake. So I've had to really, really care and understand about it. And that I now bring into what I'm doing now.
That recognition of the individual's humanity that you talked about there, from the police days to the modern day pro cyclist, that's been well received by the audience, as we've spoken about. People come up to you all the time, but also by the riders. Because if you think about your cafe ride series, which are hugely popular on YouTube, the riders are accepting to hang out with you basically for the morning or the afternoon, with Mark Cavendish for the whole day, and then the evening. It must be nice in a personal and professional sense that these riders are keen to hang out with Matt Stevens for the whole day.
Yeah, it kind of surprises me a little bit, but it's something that has come, I guess, because of what I just talked about to you. Hopefully, I go to work, go to the tour or whatever, and speak to these riders in a way that I'm interested in what they've got to say. I'm interested in trying to understand their experiences as a person, and then so everybody else can get to know them. So I do what I do, so you and the audience can get to know them, and also quite often because of the way that media is conducted, and this isn't anybody's fault, it's just the way that media is, especially written media. And I'm not pointing the finger at anybody in particular, but it can be that the behavior sometimes of some journalists, the net result is a very, very transient, thin level of kind of questioning and Q&A. So we don't really get to know the people. And that's fine if you just want information. But quite often all I want is information. But quite often I want information, but I want to know why they've given that information. And that's generally because of what their experience is and their mood. So it cuts through deep into their personality. And once you start to gain trust with somebody, they will open up. And that takes a little bit of time. And the Cafe Ride series is initially we did with people that I knew quite well. So there was already a relationship. So there was relative kind of comfort there, but I still kind of pushed. And then there was guests that I hadn't really met before as much. So that like Celia Lugwood, I've never met her apart from once or twice. But she's the kind of character that is just naturally funny. But you still have to, I mean, we spent the whole day with her, for example. And so there's a lot of, yeah, it could easily have gone wrong if my introduction in the morning she'd have thought, who's this dick, you know? So luckily, well, I don't think, if she did think that, she did a good job of hiding it. But I call it a real privilege, but I do try and give these people, these stars of the sport, an opportunity to show themselves and to kind of just humanize themselves, because quite often all we see is them on a bike, stock interviews. We don't really get to know them, and there are one or two riders that I don't think we'll ever get to know because they are innately private, which is absolutely fine. But there are other people that you kind of think, God, if I had a bit more time, we could really get to know why they ride like that, why they present like that, and that's what I find intriguing, and that's why I'm quite probing in my questions sometimes. Not to be salacious and to upset and be sensationalist. I'll leave that to other people. It's more to gently get to understand who people are and where they've come from and why they do what they do. And again, that's a real privilege to be able to do that. So the long form Cafe Ride interviews, I mean, most of them we shoot 3 or 4 hours, and obviously we have to cut it down. A great editing team at Sigma to get to the essence, but a lot of them we could do, they'd be like 1.5, 2 hours, but then you get a bit bored. So we have to, it's like the greatest hits of a day's conversation, But no, it's a real privilege, and it's one of my favorite projects, I think. We've got a few more coming as well, but they are really something that I massively enjoy. But yeah, and I think once we'd done a few especially with some of the bigger riders, a lot of the riders watch them. It surprises me when riders come up and say, "Oh, I've seen that Cafe Ride with so and so." I'm like, "Oh, right, blimey!" So a lot of the pros do watch them, which is really nice. So, and increasingly, we've had teams come to us or riders' agents come to us and say, "Would you mind?" They'd be up for a Cafe Ride, which is quite nice. So we still go to guests that we want to speak to. And we curate it that way. But increasingly, there's more brands that come to us because of the kind of positivity it brings. And also there might be riders that we really don't know. And this is a way of actually, from a PR perspective, let's be honest, this is this rider and this is what they're about. This is where they're from. This is who they are. And it's just an easy way of conveying the characters of the sport. I know a lot of teams are doing their own thing now, aren't they, with these like more long form video, which are good. But again, when you do something in house, you look at it with a different pair of eyes. So to mine's, out to more independent, and I think I can be a little bit, go a little bit deeper, and also be a bit stranger as well. I mean, and not too weird, but like Tadej's fridge, for example, because he was very quiet when we first went in. He'd only woken up about half an hour before, so he was still bleary-eyed. And we went outside, and it was initially, as he warmed up, it was quite flat, and I thought, oh God, I need to. Then I thought, bloody hell, right, let's have a look in your fridge. And then the whole thing opened up for something as bizarre as that. But that's not something you could script for. So it's thinking on the fly, because they literally are, right, we're going to turn up at 9:30. knock on your door, and then we'll take it from there. We're just going to film everything. And it's like, okay. So there's not, and we have an idea of a ride and a structure to the day because we have to book places to film in, but essentially all the bits in between are completely and utterly unscripted. I have to work quite hard early on, and then everybody relaxes, and then we just go with it. So
there's that theme again that seems to be so apparent in the work that you do now and the work you did at GCN, and also sounds like the work that you did as a policeman, an enjoyment of what you do. Is that something that you really need to work at, or does that stem from the reverence in which you feel the responsibility of bringing these people to life or accumulating the information from the...
I actually really enjoy what I do. So I think there's a combination of things. I enjoy what I do, and like a lot, because I've done quite a few different things in my career now. It's been quite an unusual career trajectory, as you will probably know, and as I've touched on. So I feel a massive responsibility to do a good job as well. So I always get a little bit, not exactly, I do get a bit nervous, but like a nervousness before you might get before a race, before you're just. So what I mean is I'm not laissez-faire. I've got another cafe ride. I'm just going to do nothing. So generally, I do have to get myself into a place where I'm on, because although it's very natural, I still have to be really attuned to their mood and everything like that. I mean, I've never had a guest that's been hard work, luckily, but I'd like to think it's because they know that it's that they wouldn't do it in the first place. It's Matt. I'm not going to get any. He's not going to be difficult. So I just take it, and especially the following we have now on these videos. I really, really, it's a real sense of responsibility, and that I get to have time with some of the biggest stars of the sport, and also that's going to go out, and that's going to be what people remember them by. Apart from their performances, now some of these interviews that I'm doing are quite preeminent. It's the kind of biggest long form interview that person has given in their career. So aside from like CAD with documentaries and stuff, but generally they are quite important. So there's like a responsibility, not to make sure we do something that they like. It's more like, I just want to do something that's natural, wholesome, fun, and informative. And the comments on YouTube are generally, I mean, there's one or two weirdos on there, as there always is, but generally, it blows us away. It's like, wow, and it did it at GCN, in the early days as well. The comments are overwhelmingly positive, and that really motivates you as well, to see, and people take the time to write some quite long responses to how good it makes them feel about a certain rider or personality. And that's exactly what I want to try and do. It's just like these aren't just superstars of the sport. They're just people like you and me, ultimately. And that's what I try and get across, is chip away at that veneer, because we see that all the time. Let's get to know them at home, out on the bike, in the cafe, in an environment that they've got control over, and they've generally got control over the conversation and where we go as well. So it's giving control to somebody, and then they can just relax because they're kind of in control, if you know what I mean.
You mentioned that you have quite an unusual career path. You opted in 2018, as you said, to leave GCN. Why was that? Because at the time, GCN was slowly and surely becoming the biggest online media show for cycling, and it really seemed like it was on the up, and then there's Matt leaving. And I remember at the time thinking, oh gosh, why on earth is he doing that?
Primarily, I mean, I have spoken about this before, but it was... GCN were being bought at that particular time by, or they were Discovery, because Discovery had just bought Eurosport. To simplify, because it's actually quite complex what's happened since, very complex. And so Discovery had a part stake in GCN. And at that particular time, I was primarily doing GCN, like 4 days a week GCN, as an employee, as a PAYE employee, but I was still allowed to do freelance stuff around it, primarily around racing. So commentating for Eurosport was something that ran parallel. And basically, and I worked for RCS as well, Giro organisers, World Feed, and I really liked that. And unfortunately, the proposal was, Matt, we just want you to do YouTube stuff or stick with GCN, which I understood. I don't want you to do commentary. And at that point in my life, so what was I then? Sort of 46. And I thought, I want to be able to do other things because it's worked fine for the last 5 or 6 years. So it was a kind of take it or leave it. You can either stay with GCN, which is fine, or you can go and do your other stuff. And ultimately, I'd had 5 brilliant years for which I've got no regrets at all. And I didn't want to leave the commentating side of it. So I went off and ended up doing what I'm doing now. The Sigma thing wasn't even a thing then. It was more, I'd had a relationship with Sigma for a long time. The owner was a good friend of mine, best man at my wedding, on Holly's wedding. And I managed their UCI team as well for 10 or 11, 12 years after I'd been a pro at the top level. So the rest of the stuff the commentary just got bigger. And then there was more on-site presence at the Tour de France and stuff like that. So we did the reporting stuff, and then esports stuff for Zwift came online, and then the Sigma stuff, and then bits and bobs for other brands as well as my profile got bigger. So that was it. It was basically, it was YouTube and nothing else. And I wanted to continue to be diverse, basically. So it was just what I wanted to do on a personal, professional level. That meant I said, okay, I'm going to go.
Doing lots of things and doing them well, as you are doing now, is something which I think people relate to a lot because people have lots of different interests. Are you very conscious to diversify your passions so you're not just Matt Stevens, the cycling guy?
I think as you grow, you change, don't you? You become interested in different things, and so the interest that I have now, I've always been interested in films and music. My wife is massive into music and films like me. I've got movie posters everywhere in this office, and that's been one of the that's been a part of who I am since I was a kid. But lockdown, and I would imagine on your podcast, people always in contemporary podcasts talk about lockdown and how it's affected them, either positively or negatively. Well, that was a difficult time for everybody. For me and my wife, we had a lot of time to spend with each other, and we had a house that didn't have a lot on the walls. And I thought I wouldn't mind getting a painting up, and that led me to seriously, as simply as go and look up paintings on the internet. If you just put in paintings, it's like, there's quite a lot, and then it's like, oh yeah, of course there is because of art. It's honestly as simple as that, and then. That led me into buy a couple of prints and stuff, and then I thought this is really, really interesting in it. Since then, I've just been into learning about the history of art, making friends with several artists, and starting to collect, visit museums. So my passion outside of cycling now is something very different to cycling, but they coexist really well, because I think for me to be good at talking about primarily bike racing and people around cycling, which I really love, I actually need a bit of an escape as well. And escape sounds like, oh my God, I've got to escape. It's more like I just need to do something else. So when you come into the house, you won't see a lot of things to do with cycling. They're all kind of low in the mix, unless you go into the garage or one particular spare room. Then you'll see some stuff, but otherwise there's no reference to cycling at all, because I'm every day I'm living it and I'm away. So when I come home, it's a very different world, and that's not something I've done on purpose. It's just something that I just feel, me and my wife feel. I don't think Holly particularly, because I'm away so much. The house is full of like jerseys and trophies and stuff like that. Not that I won many trophies. I'm not, not a lot of trophies. But so yeah, the other stuff enables me to really give everything that I've got to cycling. So I can, when I go down to London, I'm always popping into museums or galleries and stuff and just learning. And it really, it's quite massively fulfilling and rewarding. The art, the sort of the world, not so much the art world in terms of dealerships and stuff. It's more just the joy you can get from looking at a painting and learning about what led to that painting being made.
So I've had several artists on the show because I just find them fascinating. And the question I always ask them is why they chose to be an artist. Because there's a real nobility in being an artist, because it's so hard to make a good living from being an artist. Because not only are you in competition with everyone who is an artist, but you're also in competition with everyone in history whose work still survives. So in terms of, it's quite a saturated market. I just remember one guy, Simon told us, he said, it's the compulsion. He says it's within his being to do. And I just love stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, all that, like knowing one or two, or knowing a few artists now, and learning about some of the great painters, like Lucian Freud or Francis Bacon, to name two British artists, and Hockney, who's I think one of my favorite artists, is the compulsion to paint and their work ethic as well. So they'll get up 6 o'clock in the morning, 8 a.m. or whenever it is, because some of the artists, like Bacon, for example, used to have quite an unusual rhythm to his day. But it's just a compulsion to paint every day. It is an interesting one, as if you were born to do it. And I find that amazing. Just that desire, or that feeling that you've been put on the earth to convey something through this gift that you've been given and that you've honed over time, and therefore a responsibility. And also, I think the committing some marks to a piece of canvas or a piece of wood or to paper, that that mark is about that particular moment and what that particular person is feeling or trying to convey. So I think art is massively important, and it's along with writing and film and music, and before language is the simplest thing that we can do to basically say, this is what happened at this particular time, this is what I'm telling you I can see, this is what I'm telling you I can feel, if it's more abstract, is one of the simplest forms of communication that probably happened before we realized we could create language. So that's getting on a pretty deep level, but art in all its forms is an expression of what it is to be human, which is important, but also it gives so many people so much joy as well. So to being somebody who's creative, whatever it might be, gives everybody else on earth, hopefully not everywhere, but a lot of people, a reason to look at the world. You work hard. What do you do in the evening? You go to a gig, listen to music, you go to the theatre, you go to a gallery, you watch telly, and look at how diverse telly is. There's so much cool stuff on. All of that is creativity that brings everybody a lot of joy in various forms, whether that's being terrified or thrilled or upset. I mean, that's art, isn't it? It's evoking a response from somebody that makes you feel alive. So that is massively, important to me, and to get to understand in a particular field of art what those people were about, why they were led to do what they did or do, is brilliant. Again, it goes back to wanting to connect with people, and in the interview style, that's what I do. I can't paint, or I haven't painted, so this is what I do. I hope I do a reasonable job because I care about it. So it's full circle, isn't it? It's conveying emotion, conveying feeling about any given thing through a particular medium.
I love hearing stories about creators and how they hone their craft. So Victor Hugo, who was a famous writer who wrote Hunchback of Notre Dame, amongst other seminal works, he would get his servant to wake him up by splashing him with cold water in the middle of the night. And then by candlelight, he would then have to write 4 pages of whatever play he was working on at the moment. And the servant would stand outside the door. And he wasn't allowed to go back to sleep until he had slid the bits of paper underneath the door and back to his servant. And now, I mean, Hunchback of Notre Dame, there was Les Mis as well. He wrote it. It's just so funny and interesting to find the behind the scenes of these people's work. You go to a gallery, you want to learn about the artist and their motivations for it. And I guess as well, as you were saying, full circle, it's exactly what you're doing with the modern day cyclist. You want the behind the scenes to see the motivation, which then produces the end work.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's what in a long form interview or conversation. I don't like to call them interviews. I do interviews. I also do hopefully conversations. Is to understand people's motivation, and in cycling terms, why they ride the way that they ride, why they present in the way they present, what led them to ride a bike in the first place. That's really interesting. Going back to childhood, being a young adult, there's really interesting stories, and getting to know about where people lived as well is massively important. But like you say, with understanding people's motivation is something that we all on a subconscious level want to know about. We all there's at worst there's the tabloid press wanting to know about people's lives, but ultimately we all do want to know about other people's lives. We're all quite naturally quite nosy. We're an inquisitive species, aren't we? We want to know what's going on, and I, in a sport that I care about, in a medium that I care about, I care about the people, and I want to know a little bit more about them. And I think that's almost what seemingly my role is at the moment, is to get to the bottom of what people are all about. And it is a real privilege. But yeah, that's why biographies are so popular. People just want to know where people came from. So it's like this search for information about people to understand who they are and why they are. I think is something that's perpetual. It's something that we will always want to do. The more you think about it, the more natural it is, really, because we are, as human beings, we are constant. We just want to know answers all the time to everything. That's why we're enormously problematic with looking at what's going on in the world, but we are also enormously creative and inventive, and we're constantly solving problems. So yeah, it's getting a bit profound, but yeah.
What a message. What a message. What a man. Matt Stevens, you have been a delight to speak to. Thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy day to talk to me.
That's been a privilege. I'm sorry I'm a little bit casually dressed compared to your suit and tie, mate. But no, it's been, thank you for inviting me on. It's been a really good fun to talk in a slightly different way. I don't think I've had a chat like this on a pod. So thank you for taking a different, interesting angle.
The pleasure was entirely mine. Thanks, Matt.
Cheers, mate.